you might be get the pop-up to ask for it to be okay. And before we begin, I am going to take just a moment to introduce MAPS and our speaker. So 1 minute there. I'm also going to be keeping an eye on the waiting room. So my name is Bridget Flynn. I'm the co-founder of Midwest Artist Project Services, and I will be the host and moderator for our program today. And so before we begin, I want to take a minute to introduce MAPS and today's speaker, Caitlin Custer. MAPS offers free or low-cost resources for working artists in all disciplines, collectives, and emerging arts organizations in the St. Louis region and beyond. We provide one-on-one artist consultations, fiscal sponsorship for artist projects, and professional development programs such as our mock panel, which we will shortly be announcing an extended deadline for this year. If you haven't already been there, you can find out more about us and all of our programs at midwestarts.org. Today is our second installment of Mapping It Out, a series of short virtual presentations on the best practices and simple things you can do to grow your art practice now. Each month, MAPS board members will discuss diverse topics and answer your questions. Save the date for our next presentation on December 9th, which is featuring me. I will be discussing how to write a cold call email, and hopefully you can pick up some tips on how to make a good first impression while moving your creative career forward. Registration for all of these programs is free, and we welcome a $5 suggested donation. I will share that link in the chat for anyone who's interested. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Caitlin will present for about 20 minutes, and we'll save about 5 minutes at the end for questions. Please keep yourself muted during her presentation. You can submit any questions in the chat box, which I'll be keeping an eye on, and make sure to indicate if it's a question for Caitlin. You can also just use the chat box to discuss any topics with each other. And then after the presentation, we will distribute a survey, and please do fill it out as it is really valuable feedback for MAPS. We'll be asking for suggestions for future programs and other ideas you might have. Caitlin Custer is the communications manager at the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, and she has served on the MAPS board since 2018. Previously, she spent 5 years working with ECS Music Publishing Group, where she managed strategic plans and marketing to best serve the company's composers, performers, and audiences. And she earned her BA in Musicology from the University of Illinois. So thank you, Caitlin, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks, Bridget. This is a pretty small group today, so just chime in if we have questions, and hopefully some of the others that were registered will have time to look at the recording later on. Let me share my screen. All right. So this is really a session for beginners on creating meaningful communications. We're going to take a little bit of time to talk about what communications are, and then sort of what I think about this meaningful piece, and then we'll go through the steps to actually create communications. So there can be a lot of confusions about what communications are and aren't, because they're these two separate fields. Communication with no S is the how of how we're delivering a message. So it's my tone of voice, or if I'm talking with my hands, word choice, stuff like that. It can be bigger picture, like within an organization or a family. Health communication is its own discipline. And so that's its whole own field over there. Sometimes it's called speech communication. Communication with an S, which is what we're talking about today, is the tool or the what we're using to deliver information and messages. This can be advertising, social posts, videos. These slides I'm showing you are communications with an S. So if you've ever heard that phrase, the medium is the message, that's that thing on the right-hand side here. So when I was thinking about this presentation, I landed on the idea of meaningful, because I think especially for arts and culture, that's the meat of what we're doing. We're not just trying to sell something. We're not trying necessarily to make a buck. We're trying to add meaning to someone's life or experience. And I was thinking about what the parts of a meaningful communication are, and I kept circling this idea of something that's compelling and consistent. And I see this as a partnership between two things that we see pretty differently in our culture. So something compelling is maybe appeals more to the emotional side. It's creative, maybe inspiring, certainly useful to your audience. And then on the consistency side, we have something that's more detailed and organized and logical, and we have things that are focused, certainly needs to be focused on whatever your project is. You're maintaining a consistent style, whether that's just how you talk about things, whether it's if you're an acronym or not, or it can be a little bit about branding here. And also it's about keeping your channels updated and sort of like tending a garden a little bit, and keeping posts appearing regularly. I have a big pet peeve when I see a website with a blog that has 2 posts that are 7 months apart, have nothing to do with each other. It just tells me right away that maybe that website isn't as serious about those posts as they want me to be about them. So before we move on from this, my last sort of metaphor or example of something that does a good job of being compelling and consistent is actually a pop song, right? We know it's meaningful because we hold these songs in our head all the time. And we know it's compelling because it's almost always about love. It's getting on that emotional side of things, but it's also incredibly consistent. It's got a rhythm that's pretty much the same the whole time. It's got a small set of notes that's pretty much the same the whole time. And then it's very, very consistent. It's verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. So I think a pop song is a great example of something that nails this compelling and consistent thing. So we're going to move on now and talk a little bit about the steps to creating communications. Fair warning, planning is the biggest piece here, and that mirrors real life. You'll probably spend your most of your time planning and then sort of pick up the pace as you go through these steps. So when we go to make a plan, I think it's really helpful if you can figure out your season first. So I work at the Symphony. Our season is always going to be fall to spring. Of course, we're going to tell stories all year long, but the main meat of what we're doing is that fall to spring schedule. If you're an individual artist, I think it can be really helpful to pick a chunk of time to work in, maybe just the next 3 months. That's enough where you can get some momentum building and work on some bigger picture things, but it's not so much that it's daunting. So once you figured out your season, it can be great to figure out what stories you're going to tell. And this is the first step where you want to start thinking about what's going to be compelling, who you're going to be talking to, what they're interested in, basically how you're enacting your mission. So it's really helpful here to make a big list of all of these, and then we'll weed it out later, but just start a list of all of your possible stories you could tell. Also, your season and your stories will inform each other, so you might change these and you might go in different orders as you're setting this up the first time. Once you've got these 2 pieces figured out, you can spend some time making a list of your outlets. If you can do this once, you'll have this list that'll work for you in perpetuity if you keep it updated. For most people and most artists, this is going to be some kind of social media, probably a website, probably an email list, and then you might partner with some other organizations, maybe something like MAPS. So you've got all this stuff in various lists everywhere, and then it's time to organize it in some kind of way that's going to make sense to you. I pretty much will always default to a spreadsheet, or if not that, I'll usually write deadlines on a piece of paper and stick that to my wall. You can be really detailed here. There are a lot of planning apps. You can do different things there, or you can be someone who just sets alarm after alarm on your phone. Just test drive a few things, pick something for your season, and go with that. All right, we're going to look now at a plan example. This is just something I made up, a make-believe 2-week festival here. And we're going to pretend that this group, whoever's managing this festival, has already had a few meetings. And they've come up with these 3 stories or threads that they want to pull through during their festival. And they figured out their outlets. So we have their email list and their social media. So getting this far, getting to this point of an outline, this was already probably a few meetings. The bigger your organization is, the more meetings it took to get to this point, but already we can start to see a little bit of a framework about how we're going to be communicating about our project. So time for a few more meetings. We maybe make a big list of all our possible stories, things we could cover, and then we start to put it into some sort of layout like this. This is a nice grid that just shows the 2 weeks of our festival and what we're going to talk about and when. And at this stage, this is really great because if you have an executive or a board that you need to report to, this is the kind of thing that's really helpful to those sorts of folks. It's also going to be really good for you because it starts to establish a rhythm for you. And it kind of shows you what action items you have, and it gives you some guiding principles as you go forward. So maybe in the past, you would know that you got to do something with this festival on Tuesday, but you don't know what. Now you know that you're taking photos for social media, you're taking them at rehearsal, and you'd be highlighting group collaboration. So you're going to take photos that are maybe 2 people working together more than, someone soloing or by themselves in a corner or something like that. So hopefully this gives you just like a broad idea of what this plan could look like. This can look lots of different ways, but I just wanted to give an example of some of the possibilities here. Let's move on now to writing. Unlike planning, I have a lot less to say here because it's a very individual process. I do recommend sticking to your prompt as much as possible. I'm someone who can start writing and answering one question and go way in a totally different direction and end up with like this weird daydreamy thing. So it's really important for me to rein myself in and be a little strict with myself when I'm writing. You might not know that about yourself yet, so you just have to practice and try and listen to the feedback you're getting from others. I put this book When here, which Vicki, who's in the call, lent to me. And I think this is really helpful in figuring out when you're most productive for different things. So I know that my Monday mornings tend to be pretty quiet, and I might like to schedule some writing for myself then. But I also have learned that I'm not going to do it. I'm going to check my email and I'm going to check our socials. It's just, I can't overcome the inertia on Monday mornings. On Friday evenings, I can. I don't have any blocks getting started writing. So it's just sort of noticing those things, making it a practice, and then buckling down and doing it. I think that would be the alternate title of this step, is buckle down and do it. We're going to move on now to editing. I think when most people think of editing, they think of this first column, which is checking through it for grammar and accuracy, stuff like that, which absolutely is important and really vital that you do that because it just shows people that you're taking yourself seriously. Once you've had a chance to do that, it's really helpful to get some colleagues to review it for you. And one of those people should be yourself in 2 or 3 days. I'll find that I'll write something one day and 2 days later, I think it's trite and I don't like it anymore. So that can be really helpful if you could give yourself that space. And also, I love to have people that are both close to the topic review it. So I have a couple colleagues and we review pretty much everything that each other does. I also like to give it to someone like my dad or my wife who are in totally different fields. If it's something bigger that I'm going to send to a lot of people, they're really helpful in giving me feedback about if I'm succeeding at what I'm trying to do with that message. And I also recommend everyone read this book, Thanks for the Feedback. I think it's really great at figuring out what those feedback conversations are, what's really going on. It has so much to do with relationships, and it's just a really transformational perspective. If anyone is planning on applying to our mock grant panel that we're going to extend to next Monday, I think this is a great book to read in advance of that. So we're not quite done with editing. We've done our basic edit and we've had someone and ourselves in the future review it. It's time now to do that meaningful check and see if it's still compelling and consistent, see if we're still appealing to some emotion, still relevant to what we're doing, and that we haven't gone off the rails where we're not a serious organization who's suddenly trying to be really funny or something like that. Once you're happy with your edit, you can move on to publishing. And again, we have to do another proof here to make sure we haven't gone off the rails. And whatever you're creating here, make sure to save a final version. That'll be really helpful when you go to start something similar in future. And make sure when you go to load it into your platform, I'm kind of talking about this like it would be an email or a social post. Make sure all your links work. Make sure your pictures look good and aren't pixelated. A huge pet peeve of mine is when there's the link to something on Facebook and the photo is just the person's neck, and it takes 10 minutes to make that look a little bit nicer. And maybe you will have to create a new graphic, but it's really a lot easier than you would think. A tool I really like to use is Canva. It's a web app, and they have pretty much all of the social post dimensions prefab there and lots of templates available to you. And then once you've done all of that, go ahead and release it or schedule it. I think as much as possible, it's great to schedule your stuff out just because it gives you a little more brain space and it lets it cook for a little bit longer. So if you have other thoughts, you can go back and edit it a little bit if you need to. Once it's gone out, you can take a few days and then go back and check on the post or the email or the letter, whatever it was. See if people engage with it. Did anyone comment or write back to you? Do you still find it compelling and consistent? Is there anything you would change next time? So those have really been our steps. We talked about planning and how you kind of need to front load, and that's going to make your life easier down the road. We talked about writing and that's an individual process and you have to practice and just sort of learn what makes it work for you. We talked through editing and the importance of getting different perspectives. And then we talked about publishing, which is really the icing on the cake and the importance of making a nice final presentation there. And then, of course, we have to come back to this idea of being compelling and consistent. It's a little bit meta here because I'm trying to be compelling and consistent by putting this as the last slide. It's really just a reminder that at least my theory is that if you can get these two things working together, you will automatically create something that's more meaningful. So those are the steps. Bridget, do we have any questions at this point?
We didn't have any that came through the chat, but I wanted to ask you, so when you're thinking about a marketing plan for, and by the way, if someone has a question, please shout out or pop it in the chat. But I know sometimes it takes a while to warm up. But I wanted to ask, when you're creating a marketing plan for something like the symphony or the a performance, you have that metric, that immediate metric of like ticket sales, right? Or attendance. For artists working in other disciplines that might have like different goals, what kind of metrics should maybe they be thinking about as they're putting their plan together? Because that might determine where they put the most energy, right?
Yeah, I think metrics is always a hard conversation. And so I think it depends. I think you have to ask yourself a lot of questions about what you're trying to do. If you're an individual artist and this is maybe your retirement thing, maybe it doesn't matter if you're selling a lot after this. Maybe it matters that one person said, I really love this. And maybe they commented or maybe they just put the Facebook heart on it. Maybe that's enough. If you're maybe trying to transition to a career in this, I think you probably do need to watch a little more that you're getting increased views and stuff like that. I know social media is kind of changing right now, so I think it's great to be aware of that. One other book that is great and has to do with that question is called Jab, 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 Right Hook, and it's about writing for social media, and the basic premise is that you have to give your audience something at least 3 out of 4 times. So that 4th time you can make an ask, but you have to be providing something useful the rest of the time.
That sounds like a great strategy for fundraising as well.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a question. Do you have suggestions for helping others in your organization understand the need to do this?
That's a hard one. I think it depends a lot on your organization. If you have people that are willing to read things, I think that book I just mentioned would be helpful. And I think if you can pull together maybe a few links for case studies and show people like I had a boss that used to just want to post stuff and post stuff and post stuff. And I'd show them like, this didn't really do very well because we were just asking them to do something. Whereas this other thing where we were saying, look at this composer, they have this wonderful story that did well. So I think if you can find a few examples of that, you might have to do a little bit of work to get a little bit of a package together to show your organization. But I think that might help give an idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say, when you were talking about websites that have blog posts from 2 years ago, I was like, the MAPS website maybe needs help in that area.
Right.
But that's where maybe talking about resources can also be helpful.
Right. It's a huge capacity conversation too. And like a lot of the stuff I said, MAPS were just not that nimble because none of our day jobs. But if we plan it out a little bit more, we'll be able to make some improvements there.
Any other questions or comments?
I think one of the things, Caitlin, you could mention is how you repurpose content. So writing something once and then using it, as we like to do, 50 different ways. So I think that's a good use of resources.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like, and I meant to say this when I was talking about saving a final version. If there's something that I'm writing for consistently, like there are a couple people that I'll ghostwrite letters for, I like to have that in a running document so that I can just scroll through and see what did I say for them last year, last month, and it's really easy to access that way. And same thing if you're making, like for some of our MAPS promotions, I'll tend to write all of our social posts in one big document and send it to everyone to check, and then we can kind of pull out different things there as we need to.
Great. Well, any other questions, final thoughts? These are meant to be short and sweet, so that was just like a good piece of communication. It was to the point. So thank you, Caitlin. If anyone does have any other questions or comments, as we said, there will be a follow-up survey that goes out after this program, and you can always reach us at info@midwestarts.org. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and we hope we'll see you at the next Mapping It Out program. Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.